Good morning, everybody. Way to go. So welcome to the 5th annual American Diploma Project Network Conference. We are delighted to have you here. This is the largest such conference we've had. There are a little bit over 300 people here today. There are teams from every one of the 35 ADP network states who are here, and I think this is a sign that you all are finding value from working closely with each other, from learning from each other, and from helping each other address some of the most significant challenges in education that you face. So we are pleased to have you here. We are pleased to organize this conference so that you can learn from each other and advance the work in your own states. I want to just give you a little bit of an idea before I start this session about who's in the room and what the next day and a half is going to look like, and then we're going to start the discussion pretty quickly. So just to give you an idea, as I said, there are 35 teams from 35 states here. There are 20 chief state school officers who were here. There are 37 higher education leaders who were here. There are 13 members of state boards of education. 8 of you are either state legislators or state legislative staff. There are about 20 of you from state business education partnerships. There are about 60 of you from state education agencies. And there are assorted others of you here. What's important about this is the range of people who are here are the range of people that are necessary to get the work done that you're trying to do in your states. The K-12 system can't do this alone. The governor can't do it alone. The higher ed system can't do it alone, and the business community can't do it alone. But together, you've demonstrated that you can make a lot of progress. And so we're pleased, again, to have the diverse perspectives who are here today, because that's what makes the conversations here so rich, and that's what makes progress in your states possible. As I said, this is the 5th annual meeting that we've had. When we started, I think we had 18 states that came, so we've seen a lot of growth. And each year we try to organize the session around key aspects of the American Diploma Project policy agenda. We're doing the same time this year, paying very careful attention to the context that you all are working on. So as you look at the agenda, you will see that much of today is designed to help you see the connections between the work you're already doing on the ADP agenda, the College and Career Ready policy agenda, and the Race to the Top funds that I suspect every single one of you is planning to compete for. And we're pleased that later today, Joanne Weiss, who's leading that effort for the Education Department, will talk with us about where that effort is going. Tomorrow, there'll be several themes that we are focused on. One really important one is how to sustain the policy agenda that you're working on. It's one thing to get these policies adopted, but these are long-term efforts, and you need to make sure that they stick around and get firmly embedded in the education system. The coalitions that are here today play a big role in that, but we know that you're going to need to keep focusing on that, and there's some work that we've been doing that we'll share with you tomorrow on that issue in particular. In fact, the breakfast session tomorrow morning is all about sustainability, and we're releasing a toolkit that we've developed over the last year that is designed to help you in your states address that. We'll also be turning attention tomorrow to implementation issues, so that the focus is not just on getting policies adopted, but really thinking through from a state level, what is it going to take to get them to work in the classroom. And as we've had in a number of sessions, we're going in the past, we're going to have a focus yet again on international benchmarking, which we think is really important to help make sure that as the reforms you're working on take hold in states, you're constantly looking around the world, or we're helping you do that, to see where are the best practices and what can be learned about how to get the best results. So that, in quick overview, is what we've got in store for you. As the sessions unfold, we'll be giving you a little bit more information to help you see how the pieces of the agenda fit together. But I wanted to give you the big picture of that right now. And then I want to turn to our 2 distinguished panelists and begin the discussion that we're going to have this morning. I'm joined this morning by 2 Achieve board members, Governor Phil Bredesen from Tennessee, where Tennessee, I think, is the state that has probably made among the most rapid progress on the ADP agenda. And so we've got a lot to learn from the governor and his leadership and the experiences in Tennessee. I'm also joined by Craig Barrett, the former CEO and chair of the board at Intel. Craig has been one of the staunchest supporters of education in the business community. He continues to be that, and we're pleased that Craig is back with us. Just to set up the conversation here, one of the things I thought about as I prepared for this session is how different the world looks today compared to just about a year ago, the last time we were all together as a network. Back then, we were just beginning to see the potential impact of the crisis in the subprime mortgage market and wondering what its impact would be. Now we know. It's been a hell of a year for state budgets. It's been a hell of a year for the economy and for families, and that is an important part of the context in which we're operating. Last year at this time, maybe a month before this, Achieve had released a report looking at the standards in about 15 or so of the ADP network states and said, gee, what do you know? As states adopt college and career-ready standards, their standards are also looking quite common. There really is a common core. Perhaps it will be possible to have a state-led effort on common standards, and that effort now is going in full force more rapidly than anyone thought was possible. The next session this morning will be focused entirely on that, but that is another big change in the environment. As I said before, the economy is quite different now, and that presents enormous challenges for states trying to advance and sustain a policy agenda. At the same time, there's an unprecedented federal investment in education, from the stimulus package to the Race to the Top funds. So there's a real squeeze on state budgets on the one hand and an opportunity to take advantage of a large federal investment to advance the reform agenda. Put all this together, I don't know that any of us have been in an environment quite like this before. It is very different than what we've faced, enormous challenges, enormous opportunities, and that's where we want to begin our conversation this morning. How do we take advantage of this environment? How do we deal with the challenges and seize the moment for the opportunities that are here? So let me begin, Governor, with a question to you. This is the environment you've been living in Tennessee. How do you advance the agenda when you've got these big challenges in the state? How do you keep things moving forward?
I think, to do anything like we're trying to achieve is going to require keeping our nose to the grindstone over an extended period of years. And for me, as certainly not an educational professional, but a practitioner of the political arts, what that means to me is, not that those two are necessarily different, but what that really means to me is that we've got to embed this stuff and a belief in this stuff far deeper than among a few far-sighted educational professionals who operate in state government or in the business community or something like that. I had an experience when my other political job has been mayor of Nashville, and my big signature attempt to reform education was putting in place this core curriculum, the E.D. Hirsch stuff. And I worked really hard at that and put a lot of political capital and a lot of the public's capital into making it happen, got it done, and it lasted almost 6 months into the term of a new mayor there. So it really just taught me that I think we know the right things to do, and the whole game politically is how do you sustain that across liberal and conservative administrations? How do you just sustain it over a long enough period of time to really make it have a difference? I actually looked to the business community for that. They're permanent, they're respected in their communities, and I think can be a terrific, and we certainly have engaged them in Tennessee in being the ally that helps to make this happen.
Craig, that's a great segue to you, speaking of permanent and respected. How does the business community size up the opportunities now, and what have you learned from how business responds to these kinds of challenges?
I was going to mention to the governor that CEOs and politicians are ranked about equal, I think, below just about everybody
But that's
else.
a new thing for CEOs.
Mike, you painted the picture that there's an interesting time out there, and I think it is a very interesting time. The recession is always an opportunity to do things in a different fashion. I've been in the high-tech industry 35 years. I've been through 10 recessions in the high-tech industry. They all start, they all end, they all feel miserable when you're in them. But every time you get in one, you recognize the same things. You recognize that you have to look for efficiency and productivity in the way you do things and spend your money most effectively and not in a duplicative fashion. You recognize that you have to invest in the future. Our industry is one that's predicated by Moore's Law, which says you double the capability of your product every 18 months or so. There's another way to state that, which is that in a 12-month period, at the end of 12 months, 90% of your revenue comes from products that weren't there at the start of that 12-month period, so you have a complete remake of your company. So you learn very quickly that you have to invest in the future and that you have to be efficient in your investments on your routine activities. As I sit and look around this room, and most of the 50 states are represented, it's just always occurs to me that there's a great duplicative effort that goes on in 50 states to do exactly the same thing but in a slightly different fashion, and so you could stamp it with your state seal. We've talked in the past at this meeting that there's a huge opportunity to, in fact, consolidate efforts, to combine the efforts of the states in core curriculum and benchmarking and standards and training, professional training material. And I think that that's more true today than it's ever been. There's that opportunity in this difficult financial time to combine the efforts of the education establishment to, in fact, move forward faster than we have in the past. And it may be that the financial crisis is a good thing because it drives you to have to do things in a different fashion. But I think there's a phenomenal opportunity. Having watched the educational process, improvement process for the last couple of decades, and not being one who's been terribly enamored with the results that we have at the bottom line over that 20-year period in terms of improvement, I do think I see lots of fresh opportunity. We were chatting at breakfast this morning about the two key topics in the United States today. One is the healthcare debate. The President gave a speech on that last night. The other is the education debate, and both systems are in need of reform to get better bottom line results. I think the great thing about the education debate is there's a relatively unanimous opinion of what we need to do. We need great teachers in the classroom. They need to be prepared and given professional development. We need great standards or expectations of our kids. And we need some sort of feedback loop or tension in the system to help kids, teachers, schools that are not performing. And everyone pretty much agrees those are the three fundamental issues that we have to face. The healthcare debate, if you try to parse through the 1,000-page bill, I mean, it is pretty clear that you can't find two people in this city who would agree on the definition of the problem they're trying to solve. But I think probably everyone in this room agrees on the definition of the problem we're trying to solve. So I think we've got a great, great opportunity to consolidate efforts, to create common cores, common standards, and move forward together like we've never done before. So I guess after 20 years, I'm finally getting a little bit energized at what I see. And I hope you are as well.
You mentioned the sort of opportunity for states to work together to pool their resources, and I just think it's worth noting that most of the states in this room within the last several years have pioneered that effort. The Common Core standards efforts started with the states in this room demonstrating that it's possible to do that. The interest in the Common Algebra 2 and Algebra 1 assessment is driven in part by a recognition that by working together, states can increase the quality or create a quality test while reducing the cost to them. So I think this network has been an opportunity to try out those kind of approaches and see what we can learn from that. And I think for us, it's been very exciting to work with you on that. Governor, one of the things that Craig talked about is how a recession, how a financial crisis can drive and push the need to figure out different and more efficient ways of getting the education business done. How do you see that in Tennessee? Where do you see opportunities for that?
Well, I think I couldn't agree more with what Craig said. We've had ups and downs. This one is particularly brutal. I don't want to minimize that, and there are some things that I'm having to cut that I would much prefer not to. But I used to be in the business world, and I hate to admit it to everybody, but I ran my business an awful lot better in tough times than I did when things were going well. And it really does present an opportunity to kind of cut through some of this stuff and to get people to focus on some things that you can do that are not just about appropriating large amounts of money and moving them around. And I think actually we in Tennessee, we just used the fact that we were coming into some lean times. We didn't have a lot of money to spread around to get some things done that would have been harder in flush times when the legislature would have said, well, that's all really interesting, but let's give teachers a raise, and let's do this, and let's do this, and let's buy some computers, and all those kinds of things. You do tend to focus on the basics and what you get done. I actually think there's a great opportunity out there right now, and even in those few states who have not yet followed your lead in making this happen. One other thing I would mention in regard to that is Craig brought up the subject of health care, and I actually, I am very supportive of some form of health care reform. I really believe in universal care and all those things. The way that it is shaping up in Washington right now, I think is going to present a huge challenge to what people in this room are trying to do. I mean, where the Congress is going is that they don't have the money and they're not willing to raise taxes and they've taken a pledge to not increase the deficit. They don't have the money, and the way it's shaping up is that stuff is being laid off on the states. Almost all the proposals that are out there call for the use of Medicaid, for example, to expand health care. That puts a huge amount of new money on the table that states are going to have to spend. It comes off the top when you work with Medicaid. There's simply no choice about the money that you put in. So I'd say that people in this room actually have a huge interest in how this whole healthcare debate turns out in terms of the ability to continue this stuff over a period of time. Now, we've put a huge amount of new money for us in Tennessee into education in the last 3 years. The amount we would have to put in Medicaid dwarfs that money we put into education, and is something we would much prefer to do elsewise. One last thing I'd like to say, and that is, I think all of us who are interested in education are a lot further along than any of the healthcare debate is. I think what Craig said was exactly right. People have a much better sense of what to do, and I'm up to my eyebrows with the governors on this healthcare issue. And really, in a way, it's happening in the right order. I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening in the states. And, you know, Mike, if you had tried to organize everything as a coordinated effort of 50 states, we'd all still be talking and none of this stuff would have happened. But having the states push forward, having a lot of states having now made a lot of progress in that time, I think now is really the time to find, you know, my hope is that you'll see your next venture as starting to say, okay, now there's a lot of this stuff going. Now, how do we smooth it out? How do we bring things under an umbrella? How do we get some efficiencies in doing it and get states working together on those things? I think it's exactly the right direction, which is do something and get version 1.0 up and working before you start working on 2.0 and designing 3.0 and 4.0.
Governor, for a second I thought that you were going to say that my next venture should have something to do with health care, and I was really getting worried about beginning to sense the theme of this meeting might be we're better off than healthcare, and should just kind of keep that in mind. I guess I want to probe for both the governor and Craig. One of the areas, this is still on the efficiency issue, one of the areas that everyone in this room is focused on is the transition from secondary to post-secondary education. And as you've all been working to try to make that more seamless, to get the systems aligned and the like, as I think about the conversations that I've been involved in many states, nobody has said we really have an efficient way of using resources at that juncture from secondary to post-secondary. We have college-level courses going on in high school. We've got remedial work going on in post-secondary. We've got different systems that are loosely coordinated at best. Do you see opportunities for increased efficiency as you look at that part of the education system?
I'm not completely sure what you mean by efficiency in that regard. I think there's a huge amount of work to be done in what you've been talking about, which is aligning those two. But I think the whole standards movement and trying to be businesslike about it and say what it means to graduate from high school and have a way of enforcing that is a huge first step in that direction. When we undertook this reform in Tennessee, I talked about I'd say put most of our chips on the business community, but very much had the higher education community at the table when we were designing these reforms, and learned a lot from what they saw as the pluses and minuses of the kids coming out. Some of it was obvious. Everybody knows the kids don't write well enough and they don't know enough algebra and those things, but other things were more subtle, and it was very helpful.
Craig?
Well, I think when I was here last year or the year before, when I talked about our industry and compared it to the education industry, and the education industry is the only one that I know where, in fact, the customer who has a specification for the product delivered to them doesn't negotiate with the supplier to deliver that product to the specification they require. That is, universities have a specification. They want students to come to them with certain capability. The secondary education system is supposed to create that product with that capability, and 30% of the product has to undergo remedial training in the university system. There's obviously a total mismatch. That mismatch would last in any industry for about 5 seconds, and the supplier would be terminated, killed, whatever the right term is, put out of their misery, okay? But there has to be a huge issue from, in fact, the university presidents and the university system aligning its requirements, input requirements, to the output requirements of the secondary education system. That seems to me, from a business perspective, to be so totally obvious that the fact that it hasn't happened, and it hasn't happened in a rigorous fashion, means the system is not operating nearly as efficiently as it might. There's a huge cost of duplication of effort, remedial training, and so the college or university-ready degree should be what, in fact, high schools grant, and it should be exactly what the universities demand of their incoming students. So there's huge amount of wasted money, inefficiency in that system, and the necessity of getting the university system together with the secondary system is absolutely a prime requirement.
Any thoughts on that? Is that already?
I certainly agree. What you struggle with, of course, is we have...
We struggle with the audio.
That's what happens when you put those Republicans in charge of the sound system. Here,
Oh, we're not going to hear the
No.
I do want to point out that this is an analog sound system, not a digital sound system. Therefore, Intel has nothing to do with it.
I'd like to point out that Chief isn't in the audio business at all. I think it's important to remember that there is a state-run
higher education community, which provides a lot of it in a state like Tennessee. There also is a vast range of private organizations, many of which have different admission standards and different requirements and different themes to what they do. I think one of the strengths of higher education in the country is its diversity and its broad base. I think it's a tougher thing to do than just kind of treating it like a business purchase and sale decision, but I think it has to be done. The other thing that I just like to say here is almost every conversation I get in about education, it's talked about in terms of the economic future of the individual, that you can get and hold a good job if you have the right kind of training and education. I'd just like to offer or make an argument for a moment that an even more important function of this is to produce citizens who have the intelligence to figure out whether their governor or their president or anybody else is pulling the wool over their eyes or not. I think part of what I think we've recognized for 200 years in this country is that an educated, intelligent, able to think for itself citizenry is essential to the future of our democracy. And I just think it's vitally important when we talk about this, we talk about it from both of those perspectives.
Thank you for that reminder. I think that is really important. I want to put one additional topic on the table, and then we will, before we end this session, provide some opportunities for questions from the audience. Both of you talked about the importance of having great teachers in the classroom. A two-part question, really. One is that an area where we have the level of agreement we need about how to produce large numbers of great teachers in the classrooms where they're needed? And Governor, to you, where have you been able to get traction on that issue in Tennessee?
First of all, I mean, the way that I approached this whole issue of education was, just as in business, I think that the job of a CEO is to figure out, well, what are those 2 or 3 things that if you get them right, the rest of the stuff, flows downhill. If you don't get them right, you can execute a lot of other things perfectly. And I agree with what Craig said earlier. I mean, I think first of all, just time and again, having great teachers in the classroom is the absolute foundation and core of this. I think where the differences come is just in what makes a great teacher. We've taken the approach in Tennessee that it's not about certificates and tickets of various sorts, that it's about measuring the actual performance in the room. I mean, I don't think any business would promote people. It's nice to have a good college degree to help get your first job in the door. After that, it's what you do. And nobody has figured out a way to decide, based on what tickets you have, how good you're going to be at the job at hand. And yet so often in education, that's exactly the way we do it. We've got a value-added system in Tennessee. There's lots of different approaches to this. But we're just trying very hard to move it in the direction of we're going to decide who the good teachers are, and we're going to use that information in the way we operate our schools, but we're going to do it empirically. It's not going to be about what tickets you have.
And are the school districts responding to that? Beginning to use the information?
It is difficult. Okay, it is there. I think it's not so much a political opposition as it is just it is a whole new way of looking at the world for the management of those school districts. Unfortunately, it's just like it is in healthcare with doctors, that some of the teachers with the best bedside manner are not the best teachers. Some of the most beloved teachers are not the best teachers. And so there's a lot of education that goes along with that. But it is moving in that direction, and one of the investments that we're trying to make and hoping to make in the years ahead is just some much more specific education for the administrations and the teachers about how to really use this great amount of data we have to manage things in the classroom. One small example of that, for example, what we found in looking at all the longitudinal data that we've got on value added was that you're going to have better teachers and worse teachers. This is not Lake Wobegon and everybody is above average here, but that we found out that if a student goes through 1 year of a not so good teacher, it's okay as long as you get them into a good class the next time. You get 2 years of one of the lower performing teachers, you really are behind in a way that you're going to find it very difficult to catch up with. Well, fine, you can use that information in the way you assign students in the classes just to make sure that you move it through. Everyone's not going to be perfect. Everyone can't be an A+ teacher. We can use the information we have to make the system work better.
Be interesting to see over time how effectively administrators are able to use that information against all the other pressures that they'll have. Craig, I think I first met you in the late 90s when you were serving on the Glenn Commission, looking at how to improve math and science teaching.
Still looking.
Well, that's my question. We've had a couple of other commissions since then. Governor Hunt led one. Lou Gerstner led one. Are we making progress?
Well, you could go back earlier than the late 90s when the Glenn Commission, and before it's too late, was its report that came out with a series of recommendations, which has been re-echoed several times, the same series of recommendations. It basically said that you need good teachers, you need professional training for teachers, you need high expectations, you need to use the latest technology to provide training and skill and approach information over the internet to teachers, and you need perhaps academies to train teachers, summers. All of those were in the Glenn Commission report. All of them have been subsequently discussed and re-recommended several times. You know, I think deeply embodied in this discussion and in every one of these studies is this fundamental that probably everybody in the room believes in, which is your education system can be no better than the quality of the teacher in the classroom. And if you don't have a good teacher in the classroom, the game is over. And when you define what a good teacher in the classroom is, there are kind of two ways to do it. One way to do it is to say that the teacher has a certificate, as the governor mentioned, and that's usually neither here nor there in terms of the quality of the teacher. The other one is that the teacher does in fact know the subject matter, subject material, is a content expert, is certified in the subject that they're teaching. And you know, I've taken recently to the mildly controversial approach of saying one of the best things we could do in the United States is get rid of every school of education, the undergraduate part of it anyway, because you have a wonderful demonstration proof that you do not need a teaching credential. You look for Teach for America, or if you look at the You Teach deal at Texas and any of these programs where, in fact, what you're doing is taking content experts and giving them a 6-week boot camp in how to teach, and the results they get are better than the certificate teachers. You have to ask, why in the world do we have schools of education when we need teachers with content expertise? We need English teachers and history teachers and math teachers and science teachers. We don't need teachers. You might ask me some questions about that later.
I was thinking you were just about setting up for that. Craig promised to say at least one mildly provocative thing. I think we've had a couple of provocative comments from Craig and from the governor. I just want to ask them one more question, and if you have questions, we will turn to those of you who do. Besides getting rid of teacher education programs, where do you see, what is the thing you would focus most on in Tennessee, for example? What's the next step to improve the quality of teaching there? What's the biggest hurdle you've got to get over?
I think you cannot underestimate the value of what Craig just talked about. I mean, I being a practitioner of the political arts, as I claimed, I think I might stop slightly short of saying we need to kill all the schools of education or whatever the paraphrase was there. But one of the, I mean, in Tennessee, one of the things we've done is we've set up an entirely new teacher certification process, which takes the schools of education out of the monopoly business. I mean, it is one path to getting an official teaching certificate, not a Teach Tennessee or Teach America, but an official teaching certificate. And the hope is that what you're doing there is just saying, I mean, the theory is, look, if it's all about the teachers, which I would, claim it is, then the next question is, well, fine, how do you get better teachers? How do you get more people in? do that. And one of the things you obviously do is just expand the pool of talent. I mean, there's a lot of people in this world who didn't decide to be teachers in their second year of college who can be wonderful, whether it's for 5 years or 25 years in the classroom, and bring them in. I'm sure Intel doesn't build its business around entirely people who decided they wanted to work in digital electronics in their sophomore year in college. Lots of people from different backgrounds can come to this, and the hope is that you will get more people teaching American history who took American history in college, and more people teaching physics who took physics in college, and thereby just really upgrade I think through that the quality of the teaching. And I think particularly when it comes to STEM issues, when it comes to junior high school and high school, that content knowledge is really the missing ingredient right now.
So we've covered a lot of territory in this discussion, from common standards and the what can happen when states work together, to the need for great teachers, to looking for ways to find greater efficiency in the system in a difficult political environment. The most immediate debate on the table is between whether the right strategy is to kill teacher education or merely weaken it. But within...
You're not allowed to joke about that. I did not say anything about killing teacher education. What I said is teachers should be content experts in the areas that they teach. And being educated through a school of education is not a content-focused education. And I think we've made a serious mistake. I'm so much in favor of ongoing professional teacher training and teacher education, so forth. That's absolutely critical. But you know, if we want to teach math to kids, you need math teachers. And the governor mentioned the issue of you can survive one bad teacher. You know, if you're in K through 12 and you want to continue to have an interest in math, about one bad math teacher kills you. And you all know the fraction of certified math teachers. I'm going to give you the math quiz right now. You know, about 60% of the teachers teaching math are so-called accredited math. All right, what's the probability of getting 12 accredited teachers in a row in your 1 through 12 education process if 60% of them are accredited?
Well, you all are thinking of the answer. I think the right answer is not high enough.
The answer is it's way less than 1%. That means you have a perfect filter in the K through 12 education system, on average. No kid is going to get 12 good teachers in a row. And that's ridiculous. And then we wring our hands about why kids aren't interested in math and science. Their teachers aren't interested in math and science. That's the answer. So either you do something about that or you wring your hands about it. And we've been wringing our hands about it for 20 years. It's time to do something.
Thank you. Are there questions or comments? Right over here. And if you could just introduce yourself.
Philip Roseman. I'm a physician. I will say you are better off than healthcare. But one thing we did learn in healthcare is that when there's a recession, it's a great time to begin to hire new nurses and to get people interested in the nursing profession. I'd say the same thing for the teaching profession. So I wonder about how you are how we can use the recession in order to build the teacher profession. And there's been some really good discussion that you've had about what you're doing in Tennessee and what your thoughts are from a CEO perspective. But could you drill down a little bit more about, you know, what you're doing or what you would see as a future of taking an opportunity here to build the teacher profession from people who are laid off in other professions and maybe ready to do something different? Let me add to it, you know, one of the things that kills it is that you take these new people and you put them in the schools in the inner city in Memphis or Shreveport, where I live. But what can we do? Your thoughts on that?
I'd say two things. First of all, you are absolutely correct. This is a great time to do it. I mean, what any of us in government find is that everyone, loves to kind of make fun of jobs in government when times are good. But boy, they sure do look awful attractive at a time like this, where it may be you don't get your raise this year, as opposed to you don't have a job this year, as much more frequently. And we're just seeing a lot of people for whom the idea of, maybe it makes more sense for me to, whether I've been laid off or I'm worried about it or any of those things, this could be the solution, a reasonable solution for me and my family to how to get some income continuity and do something that I enjoy doing. I think the thing, when we looked at this idea of alternative certification, it opens the doors to an awful lot of those people to come in, and we're seeing that. Particularly, I'd say, in the languages and in the hard sciences in high school. The thing that we found it takes to make it work is a really aggressive mentoring program that you really have got to, particularly when you put them in very unfamiliar situations like an inner city school. You've really got to hold their hand through that period of time. We ought to be doing it with everybody, but it is especially important when you bring people in from outside the industry who have not done that. And I really think taking advantage of the times of this to bring in some good people, and then just making sure you do that mentoring to keep them there. But our retention of teachers that come in through alternative certification passes is much better than the retention of teachers who come out of a school of education and come in as young people.
Thank you. We've got a question back there. Other questions? In the back over there.
Nancy Wagner from Delaware. In light of the fact that we have teachers that are not as qualified currently in the classroom, and in light of the fact that we have very strong teacher unions, how do you go about removing those teachers successfully?
Well, go ahead.
My answer to that is, number one, you need to use data to identify the teachers with the greatest problems, and I think the value added or other approaches to linking teachers with student results is a critical component of it. You've got to have a system that is fair, that gives teachers an opportunity to improve, that provides them support before any further steps are taken. It is a reality that in most cases this is going to have to be negotiated with the teachers union, and I think places have been able to do that. And there are some places around the country where, for example, I know the AFT, or in some places the NEA and others, have actually taken the lead in counseling out teachers who don't really belong in the classroom. So I think you can get some traction with a cooperative approach like that. But let's face it, this is a pretty challenging issue, and it's one that's being debated all over the country now, and I think that more people weigh in on the debate and talk about the right way the importance of it and the right way to do it, I think things will move in the right direction.
May I say a word about that?
Please do.
Okay. Look, you certainly can use data to help make that stuff happen, and there are ways, when we've looked at our value added data, you actually know in the early years before teachers have achieved tenure, you can get pretty predictive information. And while it's not practical for me to completely do away with the tenure system in the state of Tennessee, we are looking at ways of saying, look, if you're one of these lower performing teachers, we're going to delay that decision, just as you might in a place of higher education, until we find out whether or not you can actually do this. And the other thing I'd say is, one thing I might disagree with Craig a little bit on is if we have 100,000 teachers in Tennessee, I want them all to be wonderful, but the answer is you can rank them. You can go through the data, and there is a number 1 and there's a number 100,000. And whether you certainly want to move the whole group up in its capability, but there are always going to be better and worse teachers in the workforce. And the question is just, how do you manage the students going through that so that they They don't end up at the, in the bottom quartile for 3 or 4 years in a row and really end up suffering for it.
But amplifying on both those comments, the use of information, the use of data, the NCLB was the most politicized thing that happened in the education system, probably in my lifetime, but it did prove one thing, that if you start to collect data, you can find out where the problems are and you can do something about it. And if you're educated as an engineer, as I am, and engineers are educated as problem solvers, you cannot solve problems without information, without data. And so measurement has to be absolutely key. So you have to have well-trained teachers, you have to have high expectations, and then you have to measure performance and have the feedback loop to help teachers and or students that are falling behind. Every world-class education system, you go to Korea, you go to Finland, you go to any place where this system works really pretty well, well-educated, highly esteemed teachers, good members of society, very high expectations, and then tension in the system in the form of a feedback loop, measuring results and feedback loop based on those results. So data has to be absolutely a critical part of this whole issue.
Thank you. Looks like we have time for one more question, and then this discussion will continue throughout the day and a half. Please.
Thank you very much. Catherine Cross Maple from New Mexico. I'd like to take us a little bit different direction and speak to not the intellectual policy discussions that we're having, which are great. Let's talk about the moral and ethical deliberation that has to go on in communities and businesses to not only have the high expectations, but embed them in our systems. And I was wondering if you would speak to what you have found to be effective in the moral and ethical deliberation of moving those low-performing schools up the scale.
We're taking a moment to think. Governor?
Well, I tried to speak to that a little bit earlier in saying that I think we need to look at the purposes of education somewhat more broadly than getting people ready to earn a good living. I mean, that certainly is one of the tools that they need to do that. I find that, I think there's a real job for governors in this to get out and explain to people why this stuff is important. I grew up with my grandmother who had 11 children. And of those 11, one of them had a college education that they got in the military. The others had either high school or less than a high school education. They all had good jobs. They all owned their own homes. A couple of them had farms. A couple of them had cottages up on the lake and things, because in America, you could come back from World War II and get a job in a factory and work hard and be right in the mainstream of the economy of this country. And what's happened is that that's no longer true. If those same people came into the economy today, they're not in the mainstream of the economy. And most of us who are my age and people I'm trying to talk to in rural communities and around haven't quite come to grips with that yet. We had the best thing that happened to us in Tennessee with regard to these standards, was talking to Mike about it earlier, was that Volkswagen, we managed to relocate get Volkswagen to put a plant up in Chattanooga. They're north of it'll be their U.S. assembly facility. And everyone was saying, oh, great, no longer I can take my high school diploma or less, I can get a $30 an hour job with great benefits. This is what it's all supposed to be like. Volkswagen won't talk to anybody who doesn't have a 2-year college degree. And that was the biggest wake-up call to the entire state of Tennessee that you could possibly imagine. And we just need to keep doing that over and over again to try to explain to people how important this is. I mean, at its core, keeping all this stuff going is about convincing people of my generation that the world really has changed and that this stuff has a new importance today that it did not have at the time that they were growing up and forming their opinions.
Thank you, Governor. And please join me in thanking Governor Bredesen and Craig Barrett for really helping to get us started off.